My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the baby monitor, ensuring every corner of the nursery was visible. It was the first time Jack and I were leaving our little Ethan alone since his birth 3 weeks ago. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Harper, had insisted we take a break, and reluctantly, I agreed. Before leaving, I carefully showed her Ethan's sleep sack, emphasizing how important it was not to use any blankets, especially near his face. "You're just being paranoid," she had chuckled, but I saw her nod, so I left, feeling a tad reassured. The cafe where Jack and I sat was cozy, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept glancing at my phone, the live feed from the baby monitor playing. Jack reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "He'll be fine," he assured me, but his words did little to soothe my anxiety. About an hour into our lunch, I noticed something on the monitor that made my heart skip a beat. Mrs. Harper was swaddling Ethan, not with the sleep sack, but with a blanket tightly wrapped around his hips. My instructions had been clear, and yet there she was doing the exact opposite. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. "Jack, we need to go." "Now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We hurried back, finding Ethan asleep in his crib, the blanket still snug around him. Mrs. Harper greeted us with a smile, oblivious to my distress. "He just wouldn't settle without a swaddle," she explained. I bit back my frustration, nodding politely while inside I seethed. It was more than just a disregard for my instructions, it was a blatant disrespect for my role as Ethan's mother. Strike one, I thought bitterly. That night, as Jack slept soundly, I lay awake, Ethan's soft breathing the only sound in the dark room. The incident replayed in my mind, fueling a growing resolve. I needed to be firmer, set clearer boundaries. My child's safety was at stake, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even Mrs. Harper, undermine that. Weeks had passed since the first incident, and my trust in Mrs. Harper remained shaky. Yet, when Jack suggested another brief outing, a movie this time, I agreed, but with one addition: I had installed cameras in the house. It wasn't just about watching Ethan, it was about ensuring my instructions were followed. Before leaving, I walked Mrs. Harper through Ethan's routine again, stressing the importance of using the sleep sack and not swaddling him with a blanket. I also asked her to send me pictures or updates, as being away from Ethan still made me anxious. Her response was curt, almost dismissive. "Maybe, if I have time," she said, adding that I should keep my phone silent in the cinema. Her tone stung, and I left feeling a mixture of anger and helplessness. In the dim light of the movie theater, I found myself checking the live feed on my phone more than watching the screen. Mrs. Harper seemed to be taking adequate care of Ethan, but there were no messages, no pictures, nothing. Frustrated, I nudged Jack, whispering about what was happening. Reluctantly, he texted his mother, and only then did a couple of photos come through. It wasn't just about the pictures. It was her attitude, the way she disregarded my requests as if they were unimportant. After the movie, Jack tried to reassure me. "She sent the photos, didn't she?" he said, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't about the photos. It was about respect, about listening to the mother of the child she was caring for. I felt a growing rift, not just with Mrs. Harper, but with Jack too, for not understanding my concerns. That night, as I held Ethan close, feeding him before bed, I felt a deepening resolve. This wasn't something I could just let slide. My role as a mother was being questioned, my instructions ignored. It was more than just a simple disagreement, it was a fundamental clash of beliefs and values about how to care for my child. And I knew then that something had to change. In the weeks that followed, the tension between Mrs. Harper and me grew palpable. Each visit from her seemed to widen the gap of misunderstanding and distrust. Jack, trying to play the mediator, often found himself caught in the crossfire of our silent battles. The third strike came unannounced, on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. Mrs. Harper was babysitting Ethan while I caught up on some work from home. From my study, I could hear her cooing and talking to Ethan, a sound that should have brought comfort, but instead heightened my alertness. I decided to check on them, a decision that led to the ignition of a smoldering conflict. I found Mrs. Harper pulling Ethan's hands away from his mouth, her actions more forceful than necessary. "He'll become a thumbsucker if you let him do that," she scolded, not noticing my presence. I watched, horrified, as she aggressively shoved a pacifier into his mouth. My heart raced. This was not just about a pacifier or thumb-sucking. It was about her overstepping, controlling how I chose to raise my son. I confronted her then and there, my voice firm yet trembling with restrained emotion. "Mrs. Harper, it's perfectly normal for babies his age to explore with their hands. Please don't do that." Her response was a mix of disbelief and defiance. "I raised 3 children. I think I know what I'm doing," she retorted, her tone dismissive. The final straw came later that day when we argued about how to put Ethan to sleep. Despite my insistence on following pediatrician recommendations to lay him on his back, Mrs. Harper argued relentlessly for the old ways she was accustomed to. It was a clash of generations, of old beliefs versus new, scientifically backed practices. That evening, as I lay in bed, a torrent of emotions swept over me. Frustration, anger, helplessness. Jack, sensing my distress, tried to offer comfort, but his words felt empty. "She means well," he said, but that was no longer enough. Mrs. Harper's actions were not just infuriating, they were a direct challenge to my authority as Ethan's mother. I realized then that my relationship with Mrs. Harper had reached a critical point. I could no longer allow her to undermine my parenting choices, no matter her intentions. The safety and well-being of Ethan were paramount, and I was determined to protect that, even if it meant confronting and possibly alienating Mrs. Harper. My role as a mother was clear, and I knew I had to stand my ground for Ethan's sake. Spring brought with it a new challenge, one that threatened to upend the precarious balance I had managed to maintain with Mrs. Harper. During a casual family dinner, she announced her retirement, her voice laced with a mix of pride and anticipation. What followed, however, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. She offered to become Ethan's full-time caregiver, a proposition that caught me completely off guard. Jack seemed thrilled by the idea, seeing it as a perfect solution. "Think of the money we'll save on childcare," he said enthusiastically. But for me, the thought of leaving Ethan in Mrs. Harper's care every day was daunting. Her previous actions, her disregard for my parenting choices, echoed loudly in my mind. That night, as Jack slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, wrestling with the dilemma. On one hand, there were the undeniable financial benefits, and on the other, my deep-seated concerns about Mrs. Harper's approach to childcare. It wasn't just about differing opinions. It was about the safety and well-being of my son. I found myself torn between the pragmatic part of me that recognized the practicality of the offer and the maternal instinct that screamed against it. Could I trust Mrs. Harper to respect my wishes and care for Ethan as I wanted? The answer, based on past experiences, seemed grim. The days that followed were filled with internal debates and discussions with Jack, who couldn't understand my hesitation. "She's his grandmother. She won't do anything to harm him," he reasoned. But it wasn't about harm in the conventional sense. It was about respecting my role as Ethan's mother, about adhering to the practices and precautions I deemed necessary for his well-being. As spring blossomed into summer, the pressure to make a decision mounted. Mrs. Harper's offer hung over our household like an unspoken ultimatum, challenging my convictions as a parent. The thought of her becoming Ethan's primary caregiver filled me with a sense of foreboding. I knew I had to make a choice, one that would not only affect our current circumstances, but also define the boundaries of our family dynamics for years to come. In the end, the decision came down to a simple, yet profound realization. My responsibility as Ethan's mother was to ensure his safety and happiness, even if it meant making the difficult choice of saying no to Mrs. Harper. It was a decision that wouldn't be easy to communicate, but one that I knew was necessary. My resolve was clear, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The decision to decline Mrs. Harper's offer weighed heavily on me, like a stone in my stomach. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of the impending confrontation filled me with dread. It wasn't just about saying no to her. It was about asserting my role as Ethan's mother and setting boundaries that had long been blurred. I approached Jack first, hoping to find an ally in him before facing Mrs. Harper. We sat down one evening after Ethan was asleep, the soft glow of the nightlight casting shadows across the room. "Jack, I've thought a lot about your mom's offer," I began, my voice steady but laced with anxiety. "And I've decided that it's not the best option for Ethan or for us." Jack looked surprised, maybe even a bit disappointed. "But think about the money we'd save," he argued, echoing his earlier sentiments. I nodded, acknowledging the practicality of his point. I understand that, but this is about more than money. It's about Ethan's well-being and having our parenting choices respected, I explained, my words deliberate, conveying the seriousness of my concerns. The conversation that followed was difficult. Jack struggled to see my perspective, rooted in his trust and love for his mother. But as I laid out my reasons, highlighting the past incidents and Mrs. Harper's dismissive attitude towards my parenting choices, he began to understand. It wasn't an easy acceptance, but it was a start. With Jack's reluctant support, I braced myself for the conversation with Mrs. Harper. I invited her over for coffee, a neutral setting for what I anticipated would be a challenging discussion. As she sat across from me, sipping her coffee, I took a deep breath and spoke. Mrs. Harper, I appreciate your offer to take care of Ethan. It means a lot, but I've decided that it's best for us to continue with our current childcare arrangement. Her reaction was a mix of surprise and hurt, her brows knitting together in confusion. But why? I thought it would be perfect, she said, her voice tinged with disappointment. I explained my stance, carefully choosing words that conveyed respect but also firmness. It's important for me to have certain practices followed, and while I value your experience, I feel more comfortable sticking to the advice of our pediatrician and current childcare provider. The conversation was tense, with moments of silent understanding and others filled with veiled frustration. In the end, Mrs. Harper left with a polite goodbye, the air between us thick with unspoken words. As the door closed behind her, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I had made my decision, set my boundaries, but at what cost? The future of our family dynamics hung in a delicate balance, but I knew that standing up for my beliefs and for Ethan's welfare was the right choice, no matter the challenges it might bring. The days following my conversation with Mrs. Harper were filled with an uneasy quiet. The air was thick with unspoken words and lingering tension, a silent storm brewing beneath the surface. It wasn't long before the storm broke. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Harper had come over for a visit, her demeanor cordial but distant. As she interacted with Ethan, I could sense her holding back, her movements cautious, as if walking on a tightrope. The atmosphere was strained, a stark contrast to the easy familiarity that had once defined our gatherings. Then, as Ethan fussed in his playpen, Mrs. Harper turned to me. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I don't understand why you don't trust me with Ethan. I raised 3 children of my own." Her words hit me like a wave, pulling me into the undercurrent of our unresolved issues. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "It's not about trust, Mrs. Harper," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "It's about respecting the choices Jack and I make for Ethan. It's about his safety and well-being." What followed was a raw and honest exchange, the kind that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. Mrs. Harper expressed her feelings of being undervalued and misunderstood, while I shared my need for my role as a mother to be respected. We delved into our differing views on childcare, each of us standing our ground, yet trying to find common ground. The conversation was not without its moments of heat. Mrs. Harper's frustration was palpable, as was my determination to assert my authority as Ethan's mother. But, amidst the contention, there was also a sense of mutual understanding beginning to form, a recognition of each other's concerns and emotions. As the afternoon waned, the tension gradually eased, leaving in its wake a fragile truce. We had not resolved all our differences, but there was a newfound respect for each other's perspectives. Mrs. Harper agreed to try to respect my parenting decisions, and I acknowledged her experience and love for Ethan. That day marked a turning point in our relationship. It was the beginning of a journey towards mutual respect and understanding, one that would require patience, empathy, and open communication. The confrontation had been challenging, but it had opened the door to a potential path of reconciliation and compromise, a path that I hoped would lead to a more harmonious family dynamic. In the weeks that followed our confrontation, the dynamic within our family began to shift, subtly yet significantly. The air of tension that had once clouded our interactions with Mrs. Harper started to dissipate, giving way to a cautious but growing sense of understanding. Mrs. Harper's visits became more frequent, but they were different now. There was an unspoken agreement between us, a delicate balance of respect for each other's roles in Ethan's life. She was more mindful of my requests, and I, in turn, made an effort to appreciate her experience and perspective as a grandmother. Jack noticed the change too. He was relieved to see his mother and me finding a middle ground, and our relationship, which had been strained by the situation, began to heal. We had more open discussions about parenting and the roles of our extended family, conversations that brought us closer and strengthened our partnership. The most significant change, however, was within myself. The journey through the conflicts with Mrs. Harper had been a challenging one, but it had also been transformative. I found a new sense of confidence in my role as a mother, a deeper understanding of the importance of setting boundaries, and the courage to stand up for what I believed was best for Ethan. As spring turned into summer, our family settled into a new rhythm, one that embraced both tradition and change. Mrs. Harper became a supportive presence in Ethan's life, respecting the boundaries we had established. And I found a new respect for her, not just as Jack's mother or Ethan's grandmother, but as a woman with her own set of experiences and wisdom. Our story didn't have a dramatic conclusion, no definitive moment of triumph or defeat. Instead, it was a gradual journey towards mutual respect and understanding, a journey that taught us the value of empathy, communication, and compromise. As I watched Ethan grow, surrounded by love and care from all sides, I realized that our family's strength didn't lie in always agreeing with each other, but in our ability to navigate our differences with respect and love. And in that realization, I found not just peace, but a profound sense of gratitude for the family we were building together, with all its complexities and imperfections.
You're not related by blood, so I'm cutting ties. The property is all mine. On a cold winter day, my husband suddenly passed away. During his funeral, I was shaken by the sudden words of my stepson. I thought I had raised him dearly. Even though our relationship wasn't the best, I believed there was some affection reaching him. His words at the funeral made me give up on everything. So, I understand, that's truly how you feel. I vowed not to get involved with my stepson anymore. However, the one who broke that promise and contacted me was him. The next day, my son called dozens of times, but I ignored all of them. See, he did contact me. Yes, I knew this would happen because I knew the truth. Wake up. Come on. How many times do I have to turn off the alarm? The snooze function is useless. Sorry. I'm just not good in the mornings. Hurry and get ready. Breakfast is ready. Yes, I'm still tired. My day begins with handling my morning weak husband. It's a hectic daily life, but it's happy. Phew, it'd be nice if you woke up easier. I need coffee to wake up, and I have to work hard today. There's no time. But eat without rushing. I know. Married for 15 years, this interaction is normal. The comfort of these casual exchanges motivates me to keep going today. Is he still sleeping? I called out to him, but no response. He refers to my son, who is my husband's child from a previous relationship. At 45, living with my 50-year-old self-employed husband and 23-year-old stepson. I support my busy husband by keeping the house as a homemaker. Really? That's frustrating. What should we do? There's a certain tension only during this conversation. I was desperate to ease the atmosphere. Look at the clock. It's this late already. I'm off. You seem busier lately, but please don't overdo it. My husband is very kind, but there are things he keeps to himself or struggles to express, so I try to notice even the slightest changes. Don't worry, I won't overdo it. I don't have time to break down. See you. Though it felt somewhat forced. I didn't want to nag too much and sent him off with a smile. Take care. I was comforted by my kind and cheerful husband from the morning. Now, I must get on with the chores. As I was gearing up, my stepson came stumbling in, still half asleep. I closed my eyes to his unkempt look and greeted him with a smile. Good morning. Breakfast? Should we air out the blankets since it's nice weather? Ah. Sigh. As I tried to start a conversation, he intentionally let out a big sigh. It sounded more like he was pressing me not to talk to him. After 15 years, the interaction was still awkward, or rather, it didn't feel like an interaction at all. I wondered if I was being too reserved. Make sure to hydrate. You lose a lot of water while you sleep. I threw out almost nagging words, hoping for some response, but it didn't go well. I tried to speak without letting on that I was choosing my words. I just wanted to talk, but it never worked out. Ignoring was a daily occurrence. And he would glare at me as I kept asking questions. At least he wasn't shouting or rampaging, I told myself. Trying to console myself that it could be worse, but I eventually lost the words to speak. He rummaged through the fridge, grabbed a drink and a sweet bun, and went back to his room. In the end, we didn't exchange a word. Today was no good either. The distance between me and my stepson kept growing over the years. Considering his age and all, I was sorting through various emotions, while suddenly reminiscing about the past. When we got married, my stepson was 7. And I was very confused about how to interact with him. Becoming the parent of a 7-year-old all of a sudden was, in a sense, terrifying. I think my stepson felt the same. Becoming a family with a woman he hardly knew. We had met several times before the marriage, but he never got used to me. And we relied on my husband's suggestion that it would be okay to gradually get used to each other after the marriage. It must have been a huge burden for a child. I struggled not to act too parental, hoping to break the ice. Sometimes, I think this unnaturalness created a gap. Hey, why don't you talk a bit? We can't have fun conversations if you don't say anything. It's okay not to call me Mom. Let's get along. Well, it's understandable. It's a shock to suddenly have more family. Let's get along slowly, the three of us. Right? My husband said this, looking apologetic toward me. It was tough not having the stepson warm up to me. But I knew worrying wouldn't help. So I did my best to close the gap and get him used to me, supported by my husband. Shall we play together? What do you like? I want Dad. Only Dad. I'd like to play together, but Dad is busy with work, right? No. Go away. Ball. So, let's play soccer. You're not capable anyway. Get out of here. I didn't know what to do, and I told myself not to act like a mother, while I was overwhelmed with the unfamiliar task of parenting. There were times when I thought it was growth just to have him talk back, a carefree idea. As time passed, I hoped things would work out as he grew. But life doesn't always go smoothly. I was naive. As he became a middle and high school student, not quite a delinquent. But he hung around every day without studying much. And my husband and I were at our wits' end. Even my kind husband raised his voice sometimes. Where have you been until this time? Shut up. You're not really worried. What I do is none of your business. Not our business. How can you say that? Why can't you at least tell us where you are? But there are social commitments for young people, right? If we keep allowing that, there's no end to it. Making us worry without any contact and then talking back to us. Clicking your tongue. I'm getting frustrated. Well, my bad for being such a son. Bang. I can't forget the sound of the door slamming that time. Nor can I forget how pitiful I felt for only being able to respond in such a templated manner. Should I have scolded him properly? Even if I thought so, I couldn't easily change my way of thinking. Despite various troubles, my feelings of caring for my stepson remained unchanged. And I, ever hopeful, waited with a birthday cake I made for him. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I somewhat knew it would turn out this way. But if there was even a slight hope, maybe. I clung to that faint hope and continued to wait. It's already this late, maybe he got involved in something dangerous. It's always like this. I'm truly sorry. You're making such an effort. I just got too excited, don't worry about it. What I'm really worried about is whether he's safe. Despite thinking it might be annoying, I was too worried and made a call. Ring, ring, ring. Of course, he's not answering the phone. I called several times, but eventually, it went to voicemail. He's old enough to prefer spending time with friends over celebrating with family. Which is natural. I should have realized it sooner. Let's eat the cake tomorrow. Ah. My husband sighed deeply and said nothing more. In the end, my stepson didn't come home and was out all night. Since then, the gap has not been filled, in fact, it has only widened. There were many troubles. Just thinking about it drains me. Despite being disliked, I lived my life trying to be as close to my stepson as possible, hoping we could gradually get along. I cherished raising him in my own way. On another cold winter day, my husband suddenly died. Ah, that. The cause was a myocardial infarction. Likely compounded by his usual overwork and stress, I was told by the doctor. Although I was confused, I understood that his work situation was severe. And there were parts one could accept. If only I had been more supportive. I regretted not being able to support him more. Without time to grieve, I arranged my husband's funeral. Keeping busy helped distract me a bit. The funeral proceeded without any issues. And I barely kept myself together as the chief mourner. I had to be strong. I couldn't just keep grieving, for the sake of my stepson left behind. I kept telling myself that. Everybody, I have a few words to say. My husband was a very kind and cheerful man. Despite his life still having so much potential. He unfortunately fell ill suddenly and closed the curtain on his life. I never thought I'd have to undertake such a duty so soon. I continued my speech with these thoughts in my heart. A good husband and father, he cherished his family despite being busy. And he spent time with us. I want to live on, supporting each other with my son. Holding on to the happiness my husband gave us. Thank you all for coming today, despite your busy schedules. As I finished my speech as the chief mourner, suddenly, my stepson started to speak. I couldn't comprehend what was happening, as it was so sudden. I'm cutting ties with her. This person is no longer a parent or anything to me. A stranger. Pointing at me, my stepson declared that. Wait. What are you saying? Shut up. Be quiet. I was at a loss for words at my stepson's shocking announcement. To sever ties suddenly, and at such an occasion. I tried to stay calm. But it was impossible to remain composed. and I felt like I might collapse from the psychological strain. Regardless of my state, my stepson continued speaking indifferently. Dad never cared about her. He didn't acknowledge her as his wife. Only saw her as a mere housekeeper. She's not family. The surrounding crowd couldn't hide their murmurs. I was shaken by the words that my husband didn't care for me. But that quickly turned into anger. I retorted sharply. That's not true. Dad cared for and cherished me properly. What were you looking at? Both you and I were cherished by him. Dad wasn't the person you describe. Hearing this, my stepson half mocked me with a smile and pulled a paper from his breast pocket. Can you still say such platitudes after seeing this? I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the paper. This is your marriage certificate with Dad. Dad never submitted this. This is the definitive proof that he didn't care about you. You're the one who doesn't know anything about Dad, aren't you? No way. If you doubt it, check it yourself. Saying that, he threw the paper at me. I hesitantly picked it up and verified it. It was indeed the marriage certificate my husband and I had filled out. Just as my stepson said. I couldn't stop shivering. Not from anger, but from a surge of sadness. We weren't married. Just as my stepson said, I had always been a stranger to my husband. My emotions were a mess, and I couldn't think straight. That's why I'm cutting ties with you. The property is all mine. Well, you're not family or anything, are you? You can't say anything back, can you? As I stood pale and trembling, my stepson cornered me as if seizing the moment. I've never liked you. I tolerated you because I thought you were just a housekeeper necessary for my father's work. But I'm done with this charade. I feel relieved. Now get out of my sight. I thought I had raised him well. Even if not as a mother. I believed he had accepted me as part of the family. Learning what was truly in his heart, I felt despair. Was I really never connected to my husband or stepson? My heart fell so much during the funeral that I forgot we were at one. I gave up on everything in despair. Was love this fragile? Or was our family nothing more than a pretense? At that moment, I couldn't think of anything else. I understand. I don't want anything, and I will no longer have anything to do with you. I vowed never to interact with my stepson again. If freeing myself from this shredded mess of feelings meant letting everything else go, so be it. Thank you for your efforts, housekeeper. Days after the shocking funeral, I was tidying up the house, preparing to leave it behind. I wanted to free myself from this situation as soon as possible. Was my entire married life a lie? I muttered alone in the now empty and somewhat lonely room. That's when it happened. I found a letter in my husband's study. A letter, for me? Wanting to erase everything, I hesitated for a moment about whether to read it. But fearing regret, I started to read the letter, which contained all my husband's feelings. So that was it. With surprise, the letter dissolved all the resentments in my heart. And I cried while holding it. It was the moment everything made sense. I finally understood why my husband hadn't submitted our marriage certificate. Understanding everything, I felt pathetic for having taken my stepson's words at face value and despaired over such a piece of paper without fully trusting my husband until the end. A week later, I moved out of the house I had lived in with my husband. It was sad to leave the home where we shared so many ups and downs. But part of me felt refreshed to be free from that stepson who trampled all over the love I had given. I never wanted to deal with someone who couldn't even understand his own father properly. Well, he's a stranger now, so there shouldn't be any more interaction, I thought. However, the next day, I saw an unbelievable number of calls from my stepson. He must have learned the truth. After all that bravado, to contact me so easily. I felt both astonished and somewhat refreshed. Ignoring dozens of calls, I realized it was all pointless. The name of my stepson kept appearing on my phone to an annoying extent. I should have quickly deleted his number and blocked him. Though I thought there would be no more interactions, knowing my stepson. He might overturn any situation if it suited him. His predictable actions were almost amusing. Even after declaring he would cut ties, he contacts me this insistently. Because the situation has changed. How ridiculous. I muttered to my continuously ringing phone. My stepson wouldn't give up. Why couldn't he use this persistence for something else? He must live a life depending on others. No matter how many times he called, I had no intention of answering. Full of anger and anxiety, he must be overwhelmed. But that had nothing to do with me. He chose to be a stranger to me. What could he possibly want from me now? No matter what he said or did, my feelings wouldn't waver anymore. Ignoring the incessant ringing of the phone felt good. I felt cruel enough to not want to be on my bad side. I realized how much a person could dismiss others. Finally, the phone stopped ringing abruptly. He gave up. Seriously, what a nuisance. Relieved that the nuisance calls had ended, my peace was short-lived. An hour later, I was about to have an unwanted reunion. Ding dong. Ding dong. Ding dong. Ding dong. No way. But it was exactly that. The house chime was frantically pressed. And as I peered through the door viewer, there stood my stepson with a demonic expression. Wow, he can really go this far. Impressive action in a way. Hey. I know you're there. Open up. His voice betrayed his panic even though he was shouting. You're hiding something. What's going on? Ding dong. Ding dong. Bang. Bang. He even started banging on the door. Such a nuisance. His behavior was like a debt collector's, desperately cornered. But it had nothing to do with me. I didn't want to involve myself. Bang. Bang. I'll break the door down. Open up, hey. Dealing with him was a hassle, but I opened the door, fearing a neighbor might call the police. As soon as I cracked the door, a hand appeared in the gap, pushing it open forcefully. Why didn't you answer the phone? How could you not notice after so many calls? How dull are your senses? This was his opening line upon seeing me. Listening further was unpleasant. I could go on and on with complaints, and I was quite irritated. But losing my composure would make me no better than my stepson. I spoke calmly. What? What do you want? What could a stranger possibly want? I asked with a hint of sarcasm, feeling no sympathy anymore. It's not just about what. You knew everything, didn't you? You hid it all. And you still call yourself a parent? That's the lowest. What? Parent? What convenient talk. He can't take responsibility for his own words. Did he forget how he insulted me in front of everyone and declared I wasn't a parent? I couldn't understand a person like my stepson. Stop being silent. You put me through this. He came at me with childish words and a fierce demeanor. his face so desperate it almost evoked pity. Of course, I knew what he was talking about, but I decided to play dumb. It felt like a waste to engage with him seriously. I don't understand what you want to say. What about that thing? And who are you calling a parent? I don't have any children. I continued to provoke him as he glared at me, grinding his teeth. Actually, I might have had a son once, but that must have been my misunderstanding. So I don't have any children. And I really don't understand what you're trying to say. Sorry. I intended to remain calm. But I realized I might have spoken in a rather childish manner. This was still rather mild, though. Don't play dumb. You knew Dad had a huge debt. How can you act so clueless? There's no way you didn't know something that major about your own spouse. It's truly despicable of you to ignore your own son who is in such trouble. Just because it's inconvenient for you. Which mouth is spewing such nonsense? The desperation on my stepson's face and the absurdity of his accusations were so ridiculous that it was hard to keep from laughing. Of course, I knew about my husband's debt. But this immature retaliation only fueled my anger further. Marriage? You were the one who said I was just a housekeeper and not a parent, right? I was just a housekeeper. A housekeeper doesn't know such things. Too bad. Don't be defiant. What are you talking about? Explain yourself properly. Dealing with my unrelenting stepson was exhausting. Continuing to argue would only lead to an endless back and forth. Wanting to get rid of him quickly, I sighed and reluctantly decided to explain. My husband was self-employed and his business was doing well. We lived a relatively affluent life. Slowly, I told my stepson the truth, as he couldn't believe there was such a large debt. Your father became a guarantor for a friend who was starting a business. But that person vanished, leaving behind a huge debt. Since that person became unreachable, your father had no choice but to pay back the enormous debt. What? A guarantor? That's none of my business. And you knew about it and kept quiet? Don't mess with me. I continued my explanation unfazed. Your father was a kind man. I wish he had been less trusting of others. He knew his nature might get him into trouble someday. That's why he didn't register our marriage officially. To ensure I wouldn't be burdened if something happened. We were supposed to share these responsibilities as a married couple. What a load of nonsense. Do you expect me to believe that? Why do I have to clean up this mess? You handle it. No matter what I said, my stepson wouldn't accept it. Reluctantly, I showed him a letter from my husband. Upon reading the letter, my stepson started shaking violently. Damn it. Fix this. He kept repeating the same words, acting like a child throwing a tantrum. And I had no inclination to reach out to him. If it hadn't been for that day at the funeral, even knowing this truth might have made me want to support him. That's the situation, so please go home. There's nothing more to say to a stranger. Thank you for your efforts. I returned the words my stepson had hurled at me during the funeral. I won't accept this. Didn't you hear? You and I are strangers. If you don't stop, I'll report you to the police for harassment and extortion. It seemed my seriousness finally got through to him, and he grumbled as he left. The exhaustion felt like it was years in the making. But my spirit was surprisingly clear. Thanks to my husband's love, I had managed to fend off the devil. My husband, knowing something might happen to him, had made a gift of his assets to me in my own account, ensuring I had a considerable fortune. This ordeal made me feel the love my husband had for me. It taught me that a marriage certificate was just a piece of paper. What truly matters between people is the time and memories shared. The time I spent with my husband is my most precious treasure. Thank you. My heart finally found peace. Meanwhile, my stepson, having inherited all of my husband's property, also took on the massive debt and ended up having to sell the house and everything else, leading to a life of penury. This was probably because he never made any effort and didn't engage with people properly. Later, he apparently went begging to my husband's relatives for money. But of course, they wanted nothing to do with him. Originally, my stepson had relied on our family's wealth and dropped out of college, never seriously looking for a job and only working odd jobs occasionally. Now, it seems he's living day to day. Well, it's no longer my concern. I vowed to live the rest of my life cherishing the memories with my husband, who had cherished me, not splurging but living meaningfully. My name is Rachel. I'm 42 and work at a trading company. I have a precious fiancé now, and ever since I was young, my late father told me to study Spanish because it would become essential. I attended a Spanish language school and watched foreign dramas at home to become familiar with the language. In middle and high school, I was always the top student in Spanish. When I was in high school, my father passed away, leaving my mother, my younger sister Kelly, and me in a financially tight situation. I almost gave up on going to university, but my mother encouraged me, saying, "Rachel, your Spanish skills are top-notch, so you should work at a big company, where you can use them as a weapon. I'll figure out the tuition, so make sure you go to college." Thanks to her support, I was able to pass the difficult Ivy League of Foreign Studies, and now work at a major trading company. I always thought I should never forget the kindness my parents showed me. However, after my father passed away, my mother overly doted on Kelly, who is 10 years younger than me. When I got accepted to university, she was a little happy, but she didn't show much interest when I got a job. And she didn't seem to appreciate that it was in trading. More importantly, when I graduated from university, Kelly was still a 12-year-old elementary school student. My mother kept buying her things and praising her, enamored by Kelly's natural charm. I never received anything for my birthday, but she kept buying things for Kelly. This made me feel a strange jealousy at times. Whenever I tried to be affectionate with my mother, she would say, "Rachel, you are Kelly's big sister, so you need to be more responsible. You're supposed to be a role model for her," putting pressure on me. As soon as I started university, I began living alone. I was motivated by the favor of being sent to university and the pressure of being the eldest daughter. I wanted to live independently and contribute even a little to my mother and sister's living expenses. So I worked part-time during college, saved up. I deposited $300 from my salary into my mother's bank account every month, and $500 when I received bonuses. In my first year, I managed to put in a total of $4,000, even though I was living very frugally. However, my mother and sister never thanked me. They acted as if it was only natural for the eldest daughter to contribute that much. As I received raises over the years, I tried to gradually increase the amount I sent home. I rarely called home, and only occasionally received a little contact from my mother. I felt a growing distance between us. Even when I returned home occasionally, I didn't stay long. Time passed, and Kelly graduated from high school. Then, suddenly, my mother called me. This time, Kelly is going to college, and I need a little more help from you. I'm already sending money every month, aren't I? Well, yes. But that alone isn't enough. You went to an Ivy League of foreign studies. But Kelly is going to a private women's college. It's going to cost more. How much more should I add? Let's see. You're putting in $500 a month now, so I'd like 3 times that. 3 times, as in $1,500? That's impossible. Do you know how much I make? Oh, no, I mean, could you double it? $1,000? That's still tough. How about $800? That might be possible. Thank you for helping. I wanted to help my struggling mother. So I immediately deposited the money into the bank after payday. I owe a debt of gratitude for being allowed to go to college. If it helps them live better, then it's a small price to pay. However, about $10,000 a year was quite tough for me. The amount I could save became minimal, so I started doing freelance work at home. From my first job to now, about 20 years later, I've been sending money home. I don't want to talk about the total amount. As time went by, I turned 42. My mother called me again. I had a bad feeling. Next time, Kelly is getting married. Oh, that's great. I've been dating someone for the past 2 years. Well, never mind about you. Kelly is 32, right? So, we need money for her wedding costs. My mother cut me off. She wasn't interested in my life. Kelly always comes first. So, for the wedding and the honeymoon, could you help us out financially? Mom? I've been sending money home all this time, haven't I? I even increased the amount when Kelly entered a private university. Shouldn't that have added up to a significant amount by now? University. Oh, yes, that happened. I can't even save much anymore. I'm 42 now. Can't you manage somehow over there? It's really too much for me. Please, I just need a solid amount of money right now. How much do you need? Maybe $10,000? That's impossible. Oh, no, not that. $5,000 would be fine. You save $5,000 so easily, but besides the monthly support. You need that much for a wedding? Is Kelly there? Let me talk to her on the phone. Then, my mother yelled at me. You don't understand anything. I won't ask you for anything anymore. There's no need to let Kelly talk. Do you know? Recently, she's been sending us $2,000. We've been living on that. You should be grateful to your sister. My mother hung up abruptly. I didn't understand what she meant by all this. It's fine to arrange money for a happy occasion. But why did she start with asking for $10,000, then change it to $5,000? When I said it was difficult, and then refused to let Kelly talk. Claiming she's been sending $2,000? If that amount of money was available, they should have been able to manage just fine. And then to tell me to be grateful to my sister? It all seemed too incoherent. I had been sending money home for 20 years, fluctuating in amount, but consistently supporting my mother ever since Kelly went to college. Initially, she asked for $1,500 a month, which we settled at $800. When I said it was too much. This time, it dropped from $10,000 to $5,000 abruptly. Finding it all too strange, I contacted my fiancé, who suggested that I might be being deceived. It was a matter related to money, so a suggestion was made. 2 months later, various truths came to light. I learned the facts about my mother and sister and trembled with anger. Then I made 2 resolutions and decided to head to my parents' house unexpectedly. While on the train home, my phone rang with a call from my mother as soon as I reached the station near our home. I decided to answer. "Rachel, you haven't sent any money for 3 months now. What's this about?" I thought maybe it wasn't needed anymore, so I stopped. "I need you to act responsibly. Send the 3 months worth right now." "What about Kelly?" "Kelly, she's about to have a wedding planning meeting." "Oh, the wedding, huh? What kind of person is her husband?" He's an heir to a major trading company." "So, you see, she's been getting a proper allowance recently, right? $2,000 a month. Then she's set for the future, and all the more reason my support isn't needed. I'm a bit busy right now, so I'll hang up. We'll talk later." "Wait, Rachel." I hung up unilaterally. My mother tried calling several times after that, but I ignored her. When I arrived in front of the family home, my mother and sister came out dressed casually. I followed them discreetly and, though I knew it, they entered a casino near the station. After about 2 hours, they came out looking pale and sighed together. I approached them from behind. "Mom, Kelly, did you enjoy planning the wedding?" "What? Rachel?" "Rachel." They were both very surprised to see me suddenly. "What are you talking about?" "Wedding planning?" "Just." "Kelly, what are you saying?" "We chose a wonderful venue together, didn't we?" "What?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm not getting married." "Kelly, you know what's going on. Choosing the venue is important." Their stories were so inconsistent, it was full of holes. I continued. "Wow, so wedding planning meetings these days are done in such casual sweatpants? Is Kelly's fiancé also dressed like that?" "That's because I'm not getting married." "That would be impossible, right? Since there's no fiancé." Mom was saying he's the heir to a major trading firm. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Well, recently, I heard Kelly has been sending $2,000 a month to you, Mom. That's impressive. How does she manage such a large amount? It's definitely impossible for me. If I had that kind of money, I'd spend it on something else. Right? I would do the same. It seemed my mother and sister hadn't coordinated their stories well. This was a trap my mother had set for me all by herself. "Kelly? About the wedding planning, no, the casino planning, was it fun?" "Playing slots is fun, but it's been terrible recently. I just lost big time again." "Right. As Mom says, choosing the venue is important, right? For slots." "Absolutely. Picking the right parlor is crucial. It's no good in the middle of the day. You have to line up first thing in the morning." Ahahaha. As I continued to talk to my sister, more and more discrepancies emerged from my mother. She seemed to be scrambling for excuses, but she couldn't come up with anything coherent. All she could do was give a forced smile. "So, Kelly, which private university did you go to?" "I'm not as smart as you, so I went straight to work after high school. But that didn't last long. I've been sending more money because Mom said you were going to a private women's college, women's university. A girl with my grades couldn't possibly attend such a fancy women's college." "That's right. It's good you're still so natural." "What's going on, Mom?" What could be going on? My mother had gambled away all the money I sent. Gambling, naturally, involves wins and losses. There may be times when she won, but mostly, they were losses. Casino, in particular, is designed so that about 10% of people win. That means 90% lose. My mother and sister, having turned into gambling addicts, had lost their ability to make rational decisions, and were nearly at the point of mental breakdown. Mom, here, this is for you. A souvenir. What is it? This envelope? Is it a bundle of money? That's so generous. What are you talking about? It's a record of your actions for the past 3 months. Record of actions? My mother and sister intensely examined the contents of the envelope. It was filled with photos showing just how much they had been indulging in casino over the last 3 months. My fiancé's suggestion was to hire a private detective. They frequented the casino parlors almost daily, winning a little only to lose a lot. They had even started borrowing from payday loan services. Mom, if you and Kelly were planning to scam money from me, you should have coordinated your story better. By now, Kelly has told me almost everything, and it was all too sloppy. I was grateful for being sent to the Ivy League of Foreign Studies, knowing full well that it was all paid for with the inheritance Dad left us. I felt indebted to both you and Dad, which is why I kept sending money, never imagining it was being used this way. You've deceived me for 20 years. Rachel. I'm sorry. I'll stop playing slots, I can't win anymore. Please, forgive me. Me too. You're all I have, big sister. Slot is fun, but I'll quit. Why don't you two get serious jobs? So, if we get serious jobs, will you start sending money again? What? I was astonished by their response even now. You'll send us money, right? Otherwise, we can't get out of this cycle of debt. If you say you won't send money, I'll come to your house to take it. Surely our kind big sister will help us. We're family, after all. That's impossible. What? Pedro, come here. I called over my fiancé, who had been waiting nearby. Hello. Who is this? This is Carlos, his nickname is Los. We met at the company. And we just got married recently. I was going to introduce him to you, Mom and Kelly, but well, it turned out like this. I think this is enough. Los is very clear about yes and no, and he says he can't be family with people who are dishonest about money, so at the same time as introducing him, we've come to cut ties with you. How can you decide such a thing on your own? Los, please tell them in English. With a smile, my fiancé Carlos explained to my mother and sister. Ending ties with money is ending ties with us. This is common in the world. The end. My mother and sister listened with their mouths agape. What is he saying? If you don't understand, look it up in a dictionary. Bye then. Wait, Rachel. Rachel. Carlos and I caught a taxi and left the scene. For me, it was a final tour of the local sites. Carlos was delighted. After thoroughly enjoying our sightseeing, we took the train back. My estranged mother and sister ended up selling the house. My father left to pay off debts. But the property value was too low to sustain a decent living. They moved into a shabby apartment and tried to get by with part-time jobs. But their gambling habits didn't fade, accelerating their cycle of debt. It was an incurable disease. My husband Carlos, an executive at the trading company I work for, had finished his assignment in America and was finally taking me back to his native Spain. I had always dreamed of living abroad, though I converse with my husband using a mix of English and Spanish. When meeting people in Spain, it's purely in Spanish. The Spanish I learned is different in pronunciation from the Queen's Spanish spoken in Spain, akin to the difference between standard and countryside. Carlos had often pointed this out before we married, but he now says it has improved greatly. Language is indeed deep. Without the monthly remittances I was able to save, I still work at the company while dealing with American clients through. Fortunately, my husband detests gambling. Money earned through gambling vanishes as quickly as it comes, he says. Money earned through hard work is clean money, which anyone would use carefully. Carlos and I share similar values about money, like turtles. We save steadily and avoid wasteful spending. In today's uncertain world, you never know when you might need a substantial amount of money. For my happiness and for my family, I plan to treasure clean money even more. Please do something. I cried out, tears streaming down my face. But my mother-in-law and husband just ignored me. Covered in blood, they seemed more worried about the dog that bit me and whether the floor was stained than about me. Left with no choice, I called an ambulance myself and was transported alone. In the ambulance, I couldn't stop crying. During the transport, my husband called, "Oh, send the ambulance back. Moms." He continued to shout desperately. My name is Sarah Brown, 34 years old. 4 years ago, a friend dragged me to a mixer saying, "There's a gathering with government employees. You're coming, right?" That's where I met my husband, Eric, 7 years my junior. My father is a basketball master and my mother is a PE teacher. Growing up in a family of athletes, with 3 older brothers who are all basketball experts, I developed a somewhat masculine personality. Eric, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. When we first met, his shirt buttons were misaligned, and he stumbled through his toast. A nice guy. Not bad at all, but he seemed to struggle to get things right. I found him adorable, and it tickled my maternal instincts. After several dates, I was the one who suggested we start a relationship. Eric always soothed me. Someone who could get a bit irritable. Eventually, I wanted to be with him forever. On our first anniversary, "I'll take care of you for the rest of our lives. Let's get married." With those bold words, I proposed. Eric, teary-eyed, replied, "Sarah, that's my line. Thanks for everything. Let's keep it up." And we decided to get married. When we visited my parents for the first time, Eric was terrified by my stern father and 3 brothers. "Don't be so scared." "Yes," he replied loudly, but his voice cracked, making the whole family laugh. My father said he might not seem reliable, but he really fretted over the gift. And his love for Sarah is clear, which makes me happy. After greeting my family, it was time to visit Eric's family. According to him, his father had passed away from cancer 5 years ago. Eric's parents had struggled with infertility for many years, finally having Eric after 8 years. I'm usually quite straightforward and rarely get nervous, but I was truly anxious that day. On the way to meet my mother-in-law who lives just 1 station away, I was overwhelmed with worry. What if she doesn't like me? Can I greet her properly? Will she dislike the age difference? Then, my usually unreliable husband reassured me. It's okay. Mom is kind and easy to talk to. She's known as always smiling Mrs. in the neighborhood. Really? That makes me feel a bit better. And nobody could dislike you, Sarah. Eric, thank you. Upon arriving at my mother-in-law's, I rang the doorbell. Nice to meet you. I'm Sarah. Thank you for your time today. Well, you must be Sarah. No need to be so formal. Come in. She greeted me with a warm smile. My mother-in-law was dressed in a beautiful dress and had an elegant and kind demeanor. Despite my concerns about our age difference, she said. What are you talking about? Age doesn't matter. I'm happy that someone like you is Eric's wife, putting my fears at ease. She reacted positively to everything I said, making for an enjoyable time. The conversation turned to the toy poodle she used to have. Look, isn't it cute? I had it when I was in elementary school. It was a friendly and smart dog, but it passed away due to old age. Reminiscing, my mother-in-law continued, when Eric interjected. Mom, Sarah's not good with dogs. Sarah, you don't like dogs. Yes. Actually. Despite my tomboyish nature, I've been terrified of dogs since one bit me. In the park as a child, resulting in stitches and a lifelong trauma. Oh, that's terrible. I'm so sorry for bringing up such a topic when you're uncomfortable with dogs. No. It's okay. The poodle in the photo was really cute. I reassured her. Hearing this, my mother-in-law gratefully responded, thank you. As our enjoyable time flew by, Eric and I headed home. Your mother is really beautiful and kind, isn't she? Right. Mom is always cheerful and gentle. That's wonderful. We chatted about his mother until Eric suddenly turned serious. Actually, I have something to discuss. Remember we went to my parents' house today? Yes, it was quite a large house. I was surprised. That's right. Dad built it with Mom in mind, considering the layout for easy chores. Even planning children's rooms in case we had kids. We never used them since I'm an only child. Now Mom's living there alone. And it seems too big for her, making her feel lonely. So, how about we live with her? Startled by his sudden suggestion, I widened my eyes. Indeed, the house was lovely and well-maintained, a dream to live in. But we were just newlyweds, perhaps it was too soon to consider living together. After some thought, I said, Your mother is really nice, and the house is more wonderful than I deserve. But we just got married, right? I think we'd like to enjoy our newlywed life alone for a while. Yeah. You're right, Sarah. I'll let Mom know. Thanks. I'm sorry to make you explain it to her. I felt a bit guilty, but I didn't want to compromise by going along with something I wasn't ready for. Eric understood, and I felt relieved. Our married life began peacefully, with Eric continuing his clueless yet helpful ways. However, recently something's been bothering me. Hello, Mom? Oh. Got it. I'll come over now. Your mother again. Yeah. The living room light bulb went out. I'll go and replace it. Lately, this had been the norm, whether it was weekdays or weekends. My husband was always rushing back to his parents' house. Whether it was because Mom bought a computer but can't set it up, or Mom overshopped at the supermarket and needs a ride, while I sulked about spending weekends alone. I realized how caring and considerate Eric was towards his mother. A month into our marriage, it was my mother-in-law's birthday. We headed to her house with a present and cake we had picked together. As we entered, a dog suddenly rushed out. "What?" I exclaimed, startled, as I had not seen a dog there before. Being afraid of dogs, I instinctively hid behind Eric. My mother-in-law then appeared from the living room. "Oh, welcome. What's with this dog, Mom?" "Well, I've been feeling lonely living alone. So I started keeping this little dog recently. Isn't it cute?" It was a Welsh Corgi, a small breed. "I see." Startled by the dog that suddenly appeared, I managed a forced smile despite my fear. My mother-in-law, unconcerned, said, "Come on, Sarah, hold him." I stepped back a bit and said, I mentioned before when we came for the marriage greeting. But I've been scared of dogs since one bit me when I was younger." I hesitated to hold the dog. "Oh, was that so?" "I didn't know," she feigned ignorance. "And to think he's so cute, what a strange person," she said, her face seemingly smirking. At that moment, I wondered for the first time if my mother-in-law was being sarcastic towards me. Since then, whenever my husband invited me saying, "Mom wants to see Sarah," or "Let's go see Mom," I declined, saying, "I'd love to see your mother, but I'm scared of dogs." I couldn't forget the smirk on my mother-in-law's face when she saw my discomfort. A month later, as usual, I came home from work to find my mother-in-law at our house. "Mom." "Oh, welcome back." As if nothing was out of the ordinary, she walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and started cooking. "What brings you here all of a sudden?" "Eric said he wanted to eat my homemade stew, so I came over." Seemingly pleased that her son wanted her cooking, she hummed a tune. "Oh, is that so?" I tried to smile, but my face stiffened with fear. After all, her dog was in the living room. Perhaps she had fed the dog, as the plate licked clean by the dog was one of my favorite antique dishes I had bought at a flea market in France. How could anyone welcome this situation? I went to my room to put away my belongings and outerwear. Alone, I told myself not to get irritated since my mother-in-law had come. Took a deep breath and returned to the living room. That's when I saw the dog had soiled the carpet. You've got to be kidding. The newly bought carpet was stained yellow. "Mom." The dog on the carpet. I hurriedly called out to my mother-in-law, but she didn't seem rushed at all. "Oh, did he do that here?" she said nonchalantly, not scolding the dog or even cleaning up. If left alone, the stain would set in the carpet. So I ended up cleaning it myself. I thought, seriously, what is going on? I was quite frustrated. Then I heard the front door open as my husband came home. The dog, reacting to the noise, barked loudly until Eric entered the living room. Even the barking scared me. Once the dog saw it was Eric, it calmed down, and I was relieved. The three of us sat down to eat my mother-in-law's homemade stew. During the meal, neither my mother-in-law nor my husband put the dog in its cage, so it wandered around our feet as if looking for scraps. My face froze in fear, and my mother-in-law remarked, "Sarah really is scared of dogs, isn't she?" Making such a frightened face. "I brought him along today thinking I'd help you get over your fear." Bringing the dog without asking, using my favorite plate, letting it soil the carpet, and barking, how could this possibly cure my fear of dogs? It only made it worse. I wanted to scream in my mind to put the dog in a cage or somewhere. However, my husband seemed completely unaware of my distress. "Mom is so kind. taking such good care of Sarah. I thought, how is this taking good care? It's just pretense, it's actually harassment. And then there's Sarah, completely unacceptable. Shockingly, my husband began lecturing me. Me? What did I do wrong? Mom's been trying so hard, and yet Sarah keeps running away from the dog. And you refuse to visit my parents' house because of it. You're not trying hard enough. My husband, perhaps because his mother was present, started blaming me with an arrogant attitude. I'm sorry. With my mother-in-law there, I had no choice but to apologize, biting my lip in frustration. After that, my mother-in-law frequently brought the dog over. Every time, the dog ran around the house and made messes. But she ignored it, showing no intention of disciplining it. Feeling stressed from these days, I reached my limit one day and pleaded with my mother-in-law. Please, I've told you many times that I'm scared of dogs. Could you please refrain from bringing the dog over? Summoning all my courage, I begged. Then suddenly, my mother-in-law's demeanor changed drastically, and she yelled in a high-pitched voice. I always thought so, Sarah. You're using the dog as an excuse to avoid me. How terrible. I was stunned. I hadn't said anything like that. Even more shocking was my husband joining in. Sarah. That's too much. Mom was thinking of you, and you've been avoiding her. That's rude, apologize to her. I protested. Eric, you and Mom know I'm scared of dogs, right? And yet you keep bringing him over. And every time he makes a mess, I have to clean up. It's too much. My mother-in-law frowned, snorted, and retorted. Just love the dog. You're old anyway. You probably can't even have kids. Is that what you really think? Because it's true. You're already 34. It's getting difficult to get pregnant, right? But my son is still 27. He's still got his future ahead of him. And here you are, a haughty older wife. She began to complain. She had said age didn't matter. I was shocked to learn my mother-in-law's true feelings. I couldn't stand her staying longer and tearing my heart apart. Please never come back, I said, tears filling my eyes. Offended by my words, she retorted, what an arrogant daughter-in-law, and left with the dog. From that day on, my disdain for my husband and mother-in-law grew. My relationship with my husband, who had defended his mother and blamed me, became strained, and we hardly spoke. One weekend, Eric spoke to me earnestly. Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have considered your feelings more. Eric. I was relieved, thinking he finally understood my feelings. But then he said, let's go apologize to Mom now. What? Why does it turn out this way? Was I wrong that day? It doesn't matter who's wrong. Don't upset Mom. Please, just apologize. Ultimately, he hadn't understood anything. My feelings didn't matter to him. He forcibly took me to his parents' house. When we arrived, my mother-in-law was standing with her hands on her hips, waiting for me. Mom. I'm sorry about that day. Just to appease her, I apologized as my husband had instructed. But then she said, I'll forgive you if you hold the dog. It was hopeless. This woman was unreasonable. I had apologized even though I wasn't at fault. And I had tried to compromise many times. Yet this was her attitude. I've told you multiple times, I can't do it, I stated coldly. Then, enraged by my response, my mother-in-law forcibly pushed the dog towards me. In a reflex, I pushed the dog away and screamed, causing the startled dog to bite my hand. Ouch! My hand quickly turned bloody red. Do something, I pleaded with my husband and mother-in-law. However, my mother-in-law only worried about the dog, saying, "Poor thing, got scared by such a loud scream." And my husband was checking if the floor was dirty, showing no concern for my pain. Deeply disgusted by their lack of empathy, my bleeding wouldn't stop. I managed to push the dog away and called an ambulance on my phone. Soon after, the ambulance arrived. How dramatic. It's just a dog bite. My mother-in-law mocked me with a scornful look. Even as the ambulance arrived, my husband remained indifferent and kept checking the floor. Ignoring this terrible mother-son duo, I boarded the ambulance alone, shaking and crying from the pain and frustration. During transport, surprisingly, my husband called. Thinking he might be concerned, I answered, only to hear him say, "My mom. The dog bit her too. You must still be nearby, right? Tell the driver to turn back to the house." Hearing this, my feelings for him cooled completely. I didn't care what happened to his mother. Let them suffer their own consequences. I hung up without a word. At the hospital, the doctors said my wounds were deep enough to require hospitalization. I hadn't brought anything for an extended stay, so I called my parents to bring what I needed. Soon, they arrived at the hospital. "Sarah, are you okay?" Sarah. Lying in the hospital bed, they looked at me with concern. "I'm sorry for worrying you. It still hurts a bit, but I'm okay for now." "That's good. Your dad was really worried." "What happened?" "Well, I explained everything about my mother-in-law and husband's behavior. My mother embraced me, saying, "You've done well." Just sharing my troubles felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders, as I felt alone all this time. My father, however, was furious. "I won't forgive them." The next day, my husband called, furious. "What the hell?" Suddenly, the police showed up at the house. And they're interrogating my mom. I don't know. Maybe the hospital reported it? They asked why I was injured. And I told them your mom's dog did it. What? What if mom gets arrested? It's your fault for being careless. Yeah, I knew you'd say something like that. But it doesn't matter, I wanted to tell you something. Let's get a divorce. What? We've only been married for 6 months. It'll be embarrassing. Our relatives and coworkers will laugh. I won't agree to a divorce. He hung up abruptly. A week after being discharged, with my parents' support, I went to a lawyer to discuss divorce and seek compensation. Despite multiple calls from my husband, which I ignored, he sent a message saying, "I'm at a cafe near your parents' house. Come here." He probably didn't want to confront my parents. Reluctantly, I went to the cafe. "I'm not agreeing to a divorce." That was his opening line. "Well, I'm not asking for your opinion. I want a divorce. I don't want to be with you or your mother anymore. Don't speak ill of my mother. It's your fault, isn't it? You say you're scared of dogs and avoid my mother because of it. The dog bit you because you suddenly screamed," my husband lectured me. As I sat there, dumbfounded by his words, my father and 3 brothers entered the cafe. It turned out that when my husband had sent that message, I had informed my father that I was being summoned, and he had called my 3 brothers as well. Surrounded by 4 well-built men, all trained in basketball, My husband's voice trembled and he shrank back. A comically pitiful sight that was frankly laughable. My daughter has been hurt because of you. My sister wants a divorce. You agree, right? Under their intense gaze, my husband meekly agreed. They continued pressing him until he agreed to the divorce and compensation terms. I handed him the divorce papers. Please sign here for the divorce. Reluctantly, he complied and left the cafe. Thanks to my family's support, the divorce was finalized. And I received compensation from him. My lawyer also secured compensation from my mother-in-law for my injuries. It turned out the police had questioned her about the dog biting me, leading to a stern warning and her having to give up the dog. My mother-in-law had overly pampered the dog since she got it, leading the dog to perceive humans as weaker than itself. After biting me, the dog also attacked her, becoming quite aggressive. Her injury was severe, resulting in a broken wrist. Now, she struggles with daily activities due to her incapacitated wrist. My husband had to move back to his parents' home after we vacated the apartment, where we lived together. Due to her limited mobility, my mother-in-law relies on him, asking, "Soda, can you help with the laundry? Can you cook something?" However, my husband had never done household chores before. Consequently, he was unable to manage laundry or cooking on his own. "Why can't you do anything?" "Oh, it hurts." "It's all your fault, Mama," became a frequent argument between them, leading to endless quarrels. Furthermore, rumors spread among relatives and at his workplace that he was divorced due to his emotional abuse towards his wife, shredding his pride. Interestingly, I was the one who initiated these rumors. While hospitalized, I had shared his behavior with a coworker, who was known for being talkative. Telling this person turned out to be the right move as he chatted about emotional abuse, Mama's boy, and the divorce, making my husband an easy target at work. Serves him right. With the support of my parents and brothers, I am now living happily. I demolished your family home, you know? I was stunned and couldn't even speak at my husband's sudden declaration. My father had recently passed away, and I had inherited our family home and land. My husband had often expressed his desire to demolish my childhood home and build a two-family house, and it seemed he had finally resorted to extreme measures. I was devastated as my childhood home, filled with family memories, was destroyed, and I protested against him in tears, but he just grinned mockingly. Well, tearing it down myself was tough, but I'm glad I was able to clear the land. My name is Kate. I'm currently 27 years old and live with my husband, Matt, who is 3 years older than me. We don't have children yet. Before getting married, I lived with my father and focused on my job. My mother passed away when I was in high school, and since then, my father and I had supported each other. I had planned to work right after graduating high school, and I followed through by getting a job at a local company. I am still with the same company even after getting married. The work environment has been good since I joined, and I find my daily tasks rewarding. Matt has a somewhat unreliable side, but he has always been kind to me, helping with housework when he has time. So I have no complaints about our married life. However, my only concern is that I don't get along well with Matt's parents. At the beginning of our marriage, I wanted to get along with them as my in-laws, but it seemed they didn't think highly of me. They always treated me coldly, which only widened the distance between us. Gradually, I grew tired of interacting with them. and now try to deal with them without causing any waves. Thankfully, we don't live together, and I don't see them often. If we lived under the same roof, I might have collapsed from stress by now. Fortunately, my father lived in the same city, which was a source of strength for me. While the relationship with my in-laws was my only troubling issue, I thought we could continue our married life peacefully without any major conflicts. However, just recently, my father collapsed from an acute myocardial infarction and passed away. I was deeply shocked by the sudden loss of my beloved father. And after the funeral, I visited our family home multiple times to cry alone. But considering my job and life with Matt, I couldn't stay down forever, and I had just started to recover. With my father's passing, I inherited the family home and land, which no longer had anyone living in it. My mother was already gone, and since I have no siblings, the inheritance naturally fell to me as his daughter. Since I completed the inheritance procedures for the land, I've had more opportunities to discuss with Matt what to do about my family home. My father had once said to me, "You know, Kate, once I'm gone, you can do whatever you want with this house and land." In other words, the decision about the empty house was left to me. That house is a precious place where I lived with my family, filled with many memories. So, I have no intention of selling the land or demolishing the house for now. Although I have to pay property taxes, I want to honor my father and mother by sometimes cleaning the house and immersing myself in family memories. For that reason, my plan is to maintain the status quo for a while. However, Matt had a different opinion. When I acquired the assets, he seemed overly excited as if it was his own. It would be a waste to maintain the status quo. Since you've got a great piece of land, we should make effective use of it right away. Matt wanted to utilize the land where my family home stood as soon as possible. And our opinions were split right down the middle. Indeed, the house is located a reasonable distance from the station, and there are large supermarkets and other facilities nearby, making it a desirable location. However, the building itself is old and has many areas in disrepair since it was built before I was born. When we eventually have children, renovating the family home could be one option. Still, I simply could not accept Matt's opinion. This was because Matt was trying to push the discussion forward, as if the house belonged to him, despite it being my family home. Furthermore, my in-laws, who caught wind of the house situation, were similarly involved. They often spoke as if we would all move to that land, making me feel like an outsider in the discussions as the heir. Seeing Matt and my in-laws so delighted, I felt a sense of crisis that my family home would be taken advantage of. So, I repeatedly emphasized to Matt, "Matt, that house and land belong to me, not to you or your parents. So don't go ahead and make plans without me." However, Matt just brushed me off, saying, "I know that. Kate, you worry too much." He never took me seriously. I had thought he was a gentle person despite being somewhat unreliable, but the moment I received my father's inheritance, his demeanor changed, and he hardly listened to me during our discussions. Because of this, I began to distrust Matt for the first time. And that feeling only grew with time. Amidst this situation, we came to a certain holiday. That day, Matt said he was going to his parents' house and left early in the morning. I was busy with household chores that I hadn't managed to finish during the week. However, less than an hour later, Matt returned with his parents. So I had to interrupt my chores to greet them. They might be good parents in Matt's eyes, but given the situation with my family home, I still found it difficult to engage with them. Susan and Steve, what brings you here today? I hadn't heard anything from Matt about his parents' visit, and it was unusual for them to come over together without any prior notice. So I felt a bad premonition. I thought it was time to properly conclude what to do with Kate's family home. So, I brought my father and mother along. Matt answered with a broad smile to my question. My bad feeling had come true, and I felt my mood sink. What do you mean by what to do? I told you several times that I want to leave the house as it is. When I firmly stated this, Matt immediately countered. I've said it's a waste too many times. So, I'm thinking of demolishing your family home and building a new two-family house on that land. Then we can all live under the same roof. Huh? I was taken aback by such an outrageous statement. But I quickly raised my objections. What are you talking about? There's no way I can agree to that. Didn't I tell you not to proceed without my consent? Even as I desperately opposed, Matt and my in-laws just looked at me with exasperated eyes. Eventually, my father-in-law sighed and opened his mouth, sounding annoyed. It's a shame to leave such good land unused. Why don't you start taking Matt's plans seriously? A wife should obey her husband. I couldn't say that Matt had never seriously listened to me. My in-laws care deeply for Matt, so they naturally side with their own son. Moreover, my father-in-law is quite rigid and holds strong beliefs in male superiority, thinking that a wife should naturally obey her husband. If I dared to oppose Matt in front of my father-in-law, he would surely yell. How dare you speak to your husband like that? That's right, Kate. We're already getting older, and we don't know when we might need care. It's better to think about the future and live together in a two-family house. We would feel secure living with you and Matt, my mother-in-law interjected next. While she spoke in a gentle tone, I felt that my mother-in-law just wanted to shift all the bothersome housework onto me by living together. Right now, she was acting like a devoted wife, smiling gracefully next to my father-in-law, but when he was not around, her tone toward me would become much more sarcastic. Whenever I visited my in-laws and found myself alone with her, she would meddle with unnecessary comments about when I would have children, or hurry me to show her my future grandchild. She would also use her age as an excuse to dump all the household chores on me. If I refused, she would insist, isn't it only natural to respect your elders? What kind of family environment did you grow up in that you can't even do something so simple? I couldn't even imagine living in the same house with my in-laws, who constantly treated me with such sarcasm. That house is a precious home filled with memories of my parents and me. I have no intention of demolishing it. Please, just leave it alone for now. I was firm in my stance. However, it seemed that Matt and my in-laws were not willing to give up. Honestly, what a stubborn daughter-in-law you are. Given the future, it's clearly better to build a two-family house and live together. Your parents are gone now, so you should devote yourself to us. I couldn't help but scowl at my mother-in-law's dismissive remark about my parents. But I managed to hold it together. In the end, that day ended without any real discussion. Just everyone clashing opinions, and my in-laws left with displeased expressions. After that, Matt and I continued to clash over the family home and land. Our current house is small, and we should build a larger one for when we have children, right? Matt refused to back down from his insistence on building a two-family home. I could speculate that he just wanted to live in a spacious house with his beloved parents under the guise of wanting to prepare for children. While I understood the desire to live with one's biological parents in the future, I never nodded in agreement. I was convinced that living with my in-laws would only lead to more conflicts. Therefore, regardless of demolishing the family home, I had resolutely rejected any discussions about constructing a two-family house every time it came up. As a result, Matt would invariably become displeased. As these days went on, our relationship gradually became strained, and time passed without any progress in our discussions. In the meantime, whenever I had the chance, I would visit my family home to clean and pay respects to my parents' portraits. However, I entered a busy period at work and became unable to visit my family home for about a month. Because of this, I decided to bring my parents' portraits to my current home and display them in my room during this hectic period. I hadn't told Matt about this, as our conversations had recently escalated into arguments. So I thought it best to keep it to myself. Little did I know, I would soon be reminded that it was a good thing. I had brought at least the portraits from my family home. This incident occurred shortly after the busy period ended on a holiday. I had thought I would finally have a chance to relax, but that morning, my in-laws unexpectedly showed up at my house. Since I had been busy, I hadn't seen them since we discussed the family home. They arrived without prior notice, and Matt hadn't mentioned that his parents were coming. For some reason, they were both in high spirits, looking at me while laughing with Matt. "Today, we have an important matter to discuss with you, Kate." When my mother-in-law said this with a big smile, I sensed that the conversation would likely be something unpleasant. "What do you want to talk about?" When I asked, Matt stepped in front of me and said, "I already demolished your family home." I was left speechless in shock. I thought it might be a cruel joke, but from the triumphant smiles on Matt and my in-laws' faces, I realized it was true. "What? How could you do something so selfish?" Even as I rushed toward him in panic, Matt just smirked at me with an air of confidence. He had taken it upon himself to demolish my family home and land without my permission. Due to the busy period at work, I hadn't been able to check on my family home for the past month. It seemed that Matt had seized that opportunity. "Well, tearing it down myself was tough, but I'm glad I managed to clear the land," he said, feigning exhaustion. He had hesitated to pay for the demolition costs, and instead borrowed heavy machinery from his father, demolishing the house himself. In fact, my father-in-law owned a small factory and had several pieces of heavy equipment. He had likely lent the machinery to help his son without considering the consequences. "Why would you do something like that without asking?" "I've been opposed to the demolition this whole time, haven't I?" I couldn't tolerate the terrible actions of Matt and the others, pleading with a trembling voice. My family home still contained many of my parents' belongings, and there were mementos like childhood family albums. The only thing that remained safe was my parents' portraits, which I had brought home with me. Everything else had been removed along with the rubble, and it felt like a nightmare. "How could you be so cruel? I will never forgive you." I had reached my limit. Even as I glared at Matt, the three of them maintained their smug expressions. "You've been so indecisive for too long, so I made the first move. We can't keep waiting for you to change your mind." Matt had an arrogant attitude, as if he had done the right thing. He continued, "So, I took the land from your family home." His triumphant tone made me feel my anger shifting to disbelief. I could feel the love I had left for Matt quickly fading away. It seemed neither Matt nor my in-laws understood the gravity of their actions, and I let out a deep sigh. "What are you saying? When did I ever agree to give you that land? I didn't even complete any paperwork, so it still belongs to me." It appeared that Matt didn't fully grasp the meaning of my words, looking puzzled, while my in-laws wore similar confused expressions. Since the registration process for the change of ownership had not been carried out, I had no recollection of transferring my family home or land to Matt. Therefore, the act of demolishing someone else's home without permission was, of course, a crime. You may not realize it since you didn't go through a contractor, but what you did is punishable by law. At that moment, Matt's expression hardened. Had he hired a demolition contractor, he might have known the consequences. I had no intention of going easy on him just because we were married, so I continued. Moreover, using heavy machinery on someone else's land without permission is a crime, even if it belonged to your father's company. I will be pressing charges. Previously, I had researched the legal implications regarding real estate crimes in case of any issues arising from the land I inherited from my father. I never imagined that Matt would actually resort to such extreme measures. When I mentioned the heavy machinery, my father-in-law, who had maintained a calm demeanor until then, suddenly raised his voice. Wait a minute. You two are married, so Kate's land is effectively Matt's too. Therefore, demolishing that house shouldn't be a crime. I've said it before, but the owner of that house is me, not Matt. Furthermore, I didn't agree to the demolition, nor was I even informed about it. What he did was a clear criminal act, so I will report this to the police. I can't just stand by while my cherished home is destroyed. When I replied calmly, my father-in-law was left speechless. It seemed he had taken this matter lightly. Although he lent his equipment to demolish the house, he hadn't considered that I, as Matt's wife, would think of reporting him. He likely thought he could make excuses after clearing the land. You're going to report Matt? You're his wife. There's no way you would actually do something so terrible. In place of my silent father-in-law, my mother-in-law shouted in a panic. You are the ones who are terrible for demolishing someone else's house without permission. This isn't something that can be excused just because you're husband and wife. After replying, I operated my smartphone and thrust the search results in front of Matt. The screen displayed the legal implications of the crime he had committed. What you did constitutes property destruction. It's a crime that carries a prison sentence without a fine, so you're definitely going to jail. Jail. My father-in-law raised his voice in panic, and my mother-in-law let out a short scream. Wait. Don't call the police. Think it over, we're married, right? Matt clung to my arm with a pale face. However, I shook off his hand firmly, saying, Stop using our marriage as a shield. You destroyed my family home and all my memories. Then I stated, I'm going to call the police now, and decided right then to report them. It seemed that Matt finally realized the irreversible mistake he had made. Am I going to be arrested? Me? No way, that can't be true. He mumbled in a tremble, and eventually, he foamed at the mouth and collapsed right in front of me. Afterward, Matt was arrested, and I moved out of the house we had shared and rented an apartment near where my family home had stood. I intended to get a divorce immediately, but since Matt refused, the discussions through our lawyers became prolonged. As a result, I was starting to consider filing for mediation at the family court. In the meantime, I was gathering information about Matt through lawyers and private investigators. What I discovered was that Matt had been frequenting strip clubs for years and had secret debts. He had apparently had his eye on the substantial inheritance I was to receive from my father, believing that if I came into a large sum of money, he could pay off all his debts. When I learned the truth, I was speechless with disbelief. Matt had told his parents about his debts, and shockingly, they had agreed to be co-signers for him. I could easily picture my in-laws immediately agreeing to help him, out of love for their son. Since Matt's arrest, it seemed his parents had been cleaning up after him regarding his debts. One day, I suddenly received a phone call from my mother-in-law. "Kate, help me." The urgency in her voice was palpable. It turned out she was asking me to lend her money outright. Apparently, they were being pressured to repay Matt's debts. And they were struggling financially. "Kate, you have your father's inheritance, right? Please share some of that money with us," she said shamelessly. I couldn't bring myself to take her seriously and replied curtly, "That's not possible. Please manage it on your own," before hanging up. However, anticipating another call, I decided to block my in-laws' phone number. Since I hadn't given them my new apartment address, they probably wouldn't show up at my home. I no longer wanted to be involved with them or Matt ever again. The phone call from my mother-in-law intensified my desire to cut ties with Matt. And I decided to file for mediation for a divorce. Eventually, the mediation was successful, and we got divorced. Afterward, my in-laws lost everything, including their home and my father-in-law's factory, and were left to repay their debts. They reportedly moved to a small apartment in the countryside and were living modestly. Years later, Matt completed his prison sentence, but found it difficult to get a job due to his criminal record. He seemed to have been arrested again for committing petty crimes like shoplifting. After my divorce from Matt, I was able to live comfortably by renting out the land he had cleared. With the inheritance my father left me, I would not have trouble living alone in the future. And I planned to continue working for a long time. Now that I was free from Matt and my in-laws, I felt I could work with renewed vigor. I hadn't thought about remarriage yet, so for the time being, I intended to enjoy my carefree single life while focusing on my job.